Hello everyone watching and welcome back to my channel. I'm Bird's Eye View and I take a bird's eye view, look at things such as politics and international relations around the globe. In this video, I'm going to be covering the recent primary results in states such as Kansas, Wyoming, and Alaska. I'm going to be starting in Wyoming because it's the most easy to explain and also the most important when we look at the development of the Republican Party. In the Republican Party, there have been, until very recently, many different areas of thought. You had your pro-business Republicans who were more socially moderate. You had your social conservatives, mostly religious, who were much more economically centrist. You, of course, had your right-wing, most conservative, both right-wing economics and right-wing socially, and of course, you even had your New England Northeast Rockefeller Republicans who are moderate on both social and economic issues. But that was before Trump. Trump in 2016 won the primary with less than 50% of the vote, but since then he has consolidated his hold on the party. While events such as January 6th and of course his loss in the 2020 election set him back a little bit, he still has the essentially kingmaker role in states and districts that are overwhelmingly red and overwhelmingly pro-Trump. Meanwhile, the only other real lane in the GOP outside of one that was completely pro-Trump was the anti-Trump lane, and the leader of that was, at least until yesterday, Liz Cheney. Cheney's father was one of the main leaders of the old guard of the Republican Party, those conservatives, but they weren't populist. They were much more establishment conservatives, if you would. And Cheney's father backed her in this race, of course, and Cheney ran as the anti-Trump and has been on committees such as the January 6th committee, where she looked into Trump's handling of January 6th and if he may have had any criminal intent through that. Now, Trump endorsed opponent Harriet Hagman was always predicted to win. But I don't think many people, at least until a few weeks ago, thought Cheney would lose this badly. Someone who had won 73% of the vote in her primary just 2 years ago, in the reddest state in the nation, suddenly collapsed down to 30% of the vote, while a challenger who was relatively unheard of until a few years ago is now had 2/3 of the vote in the same primary. Now, I think that this is 99% of the cause of Trump. Before Trump endorsed Hagman, there were many pro-Trump people running against Cheney, threatening to split the anti-Cheney vote. But when Trump endorsed Hagman, Hagman immediately not only became the frontrunner, but the other Trump lane candidates essentially pulled out. Some of them were left on the ballot, such as Bouchard, but realistically, the Trump lane consolidated around Hagman, and especially in a state like Wyoming, we learned the Trump wing is bigger. Now, what does this mean for the overall elections? Well, in the Senate, what we have seen is that those more fully pro-Trump, such as Mehmet Oz, are running a little bit behind their less pro-Trump counterparts. Most notably in the governor's race, we have Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania, my home state, is running far behind Shapiro, while in Georgia, someone who is at least trying to bridge the anti-Trump, pro-Trump divide in the Republican Party, Brian Kemp, is running far ahead of Stacey Abrams. Which brings us essentially to Kansas. Now, I'm not going to be showing the exact results of the referendum in Kansas, but what you need to know is that in Kansas, they voted to have a pro-choice, essentially maintenance of the status quo in Kansas. The amendment that was proposed there, if they had voted yes, would have removed protections for abortion from the Kansas Constitution, which then would have allowed Republicans in the state legislature, possibly assuming Governor or soon to be possibly Governor Derek Schmidt, would sign laws that would prohibit or at least drastically decrease the amount of legal abortions. However, Democrats and even suburban, more moderate Republicans turned out and defeated it in a very, very red state. Not only has this helped Laura Kelly gain a lot of traction, but it's also helped, of course, do the Democratic talking point that abortion is highly favored by the electorate. And that seems to be true, at least from what we know now with a very red state. And lastly, we have Alaska. Now, Alaska is very interesting because Alaska has not one, not two, not three, but four competitive races. Probably most importantly is the Senate. In the Senate, there were supposed to be at least three main wings. There was supposed to be the right wing Trump endorsed Republican Shibaka. There was supposed to be a more centrist Republican in Murkowski. There was supposed to be a center left Democrat in Chesbro, and maybe a different candidate, some fourth place candidate who would be eliminated. Alaska uses ranked choice voting, which essentially means that every single candidate can run in the primary from any party, and they're all in one, but only the top four people advance to the general election. In the general election, people rank their votes or candidates through votes accordingly. So if I was a right wing Republican in Alaska, I would probably put Tishibaka first, but I might rank Murkowski second because at least she's a centrist, center right alternative to the more left wing Democrats. That was at least thought to be the case. This supposedly three-way race is now a two-way race. Chesbro, with 6%, has no hope of being in third place when they get to that area in the ranked choice voting. Chesbro can only be in third place. She cannot go up past either of the main two candidates, who both had over 40% of the vote, which probably ensures Murkowski's victory. With a center left Democrat in the running with 6%, you take that, you add it to Murkowski's 44%, that's enough to win a majority. So as long as there is somewhat of nothing crazy happens in Alaska, Murkowski should be safe. However, what's more important is the map. As you can see here, Tishibaka won most of those, more Republican areas, while the more Democrat or swing areas of the state voted for Murkowski. And that's very important when you look at the next area where essentially we had a four-way race. At the beginning of the campaign, we had Patola versus Begich. Begich being a center-right Republican, kind of, but not quite centrist as Murkowski. Patola being a center-left Native American Alaskan Democrat. But then Sarah Palin joined the race, the more right-wing Trump-endorsed Republican. This essentially knocked out the fourth candidate, and as you can see, 4% of the vote will not be enough to do anything in the general election. But what is more important is the map, of course. When you look at what Murkowski did well in the southeast and southwest of the state, and in, of course, the cities. That is exactly where Patola won. Begich, meanwhile, won almost everywhere else that Patola didn't win that Murkowski won, while Palin won essentially the same map as Shibaka won. Every single county nearly was the same. However, something that's more important is that when you look at ranked choice voting in the state, Patola, being in first place, is probably clear. She's 4% ahead of Palin. However, Sweeney, the fourth place candidate and the last one advancing to the general, is much more of a center-right Republican, whose voters probably have more in common with Begich. So you could probably take these roughly 4%-ish of voters, and you can add them to Begich, which puts him in essentially a statistical tie versus Palin for that second spot when they go through to that round. Polls have shown if Palin loses, almost all of Palin's voters will support Begich. However, if Begich were to lose, Patola and Palin would essentially be in a statistical tie. And that is huge because Democrats have not won a statewide race for House in Alaska in a very, very long time. And Patola would also be the first Native American elected in Alaska, a state that has a very high proportion of Native Americans. Additionally, to make it even more confusing, there was a special election to fill the remainder of the term. See, there was the primary that was setting you up for the November election, but there's also a separate election that was happening to fill the remainder of deceased Representative Don Young, who was the representative from Alaska for 40 plus years. And it featured the same main three candidates, as well as the fourth notable candidate, independent Al Gross. But Gross dropped out after seeing that he was likely not going to win and endorsed Patola. And with the centrist kind of endorsing a center left one, that put Patola over the top, which led to this. Currently, only 67% of the vote is in. Much of the vote is in the cities, where Begich did exceptionally well, and Palin and Patola did relatively worse compared to their overall statewide results. This means that Begich can probably expect to either significantly catch up or significantly fall behind depending on where the remaining votes are. Because while many of the original votes were counted in cities, Alaska also has a very high proportion of people who live in the cities, particularly in Anchorage and Juneau. Now, if Begich can close the gap and finish ahead of Palin, you end up with the same results that I explained earlier. If Begich can defeat Palin and push Palin out to third place, Begich will almost be ensured of a victory in both this special election to fill the remainder of the term until January and the November general election. But if Begich loses, Patola probably has a slight lead over Palin, at least in this race, because for some reason that I don't quite understand, Patola, despite winning only 35% in the primary to fill the remainder of the seat, did significantly better in the special election. Now, the last of the main races is the governor's race. In Alaska, just as the other ones, you had a centrist candidate in Walker, you had a center-left candidate in Guerra, and you had your right-wing, but not quite as right-wing as some of the other candidates like Palin or Tishibaka in Dunleavy. Alaska governors historically fare horrendously when trying to be reelected. It's been a very, very long time, if ever, I believe, since any governor of any party in Alaska was reelected. And in a state that has historically leaned very towards the center in terms of their governors and their just overall representatives who aren't for federal things, Walker should have had a better showing. He's a former governor. He actually lost to Dunleavy, and he should have fared better. And as you could see from the map, you can tell exactly where his voters are from. They're the same voters who voted for Patola and Murkowski. They're the center-left voters. Someone who's basically not shown on the map, they only won one tiny area in Anchorage, was Guerra, the Democratic candidate. If Walker were to lose, Dunleavy is probably guaranteed a victory because while a plurality or probably a majority of Walker's voters would support Guerra, it's not nearly enough. You could expect at least 6%, 7% from the 21% of Walker to support Dunleavy, coupled with the remaining Republican candidates who have 11% between them. You would see Dunleavy win. However, if Guerra lost, that would present something else entirely, because as I explained previously, it's the reverse effect of what we saw in the race between Palin and Begich. In this race, if the more right-wing Republican dropped out, you would see the more centrist Republican being the Democrat. However, in this race, if you saw the left-wing Democrat drop out, you could see the center-left independent potentially beating Dunleavy, which would lead to, of course, a major shock to Trump world in a state that historically has been very, very red. So, what do you think will happen in these general elections? Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe, and thank you for watching.